Welcome to the program. When former New South Wales Premier Barry Unsworth left the aborted National Gun Summit in 1987, he warned that it would take a massacre in Tasmania to make the states agree on tougher uniform gun laws. How right he was. Despite a series of spree killings in the last 9 years that have taken more than 30 lives, it took the carnage of Port Arthur to force the states to try again. But even now, just hours before the start of the National Gun Summit, it seems the federal government and the states still can't quite agree on what's needed. John Howard's views are crystal clear. He's put forward a blueprint for gun control that includes a ban on all automatic and semi-automatic weapons, even the lower-powered semi-automatics favoured by farmers. Today, he stepped up the pressure on the states, warning this was not an ambit claim. Well, will the Prime Minister win the support of the states? That is what is being argued out in Canberra right now, in late-night meetings between the various police ministers and the Federal Attorney-General's office. In just a few moments, we'll talk with two of the police ministers who've been involved in those last-minute talks. But first, Mark Corcoran takes a look at the politics of weapon control.
This is the SKS, a Chinese semi-automatic assault rifle. It can shoot rabbits or targets, but is designed for one purpose: to kill people. The SKS was used at the Port Arthur and Strathfield massacres, plus numerous sieges and murders. 30,000 were imported to New South Wales alone, before a 1992 state ban that was backed by many sport shooters. But the weapon was still available in Tasmania until this week. The murderous use of the SKS has focused attention on Australia's entire arsenal of 4 million guns, give or take a million, because nobody knows exactly how many are out there.
Well, I'm appalled, frankly. We have a better idea probably how many dogs we've got in this country rather than guns.
The Customs Service has no details on the number of imported military assault rifles, and police are only guessing when they try to put a figure on the total number of guns in circulation.
I think it's simply a reflection again of the power that the gun lobbies had, that they've simply not wanted this sort of survey data to be gathered. It's seen to be an infringement of individual liberty to disclose whether you have a gun and also what sort of gun, and presumably even where it's kept. So people have played out or stayed out of this area and have simply not conducted this sort of study.
The gun lobby burst onto the political scene back in 1988. Responding to Melbourne's Hoddle and Queen Street massacres, the New South Wales and Victorian governments banned some semi-automatics. Shooters were outraged.
You see this? He's got an automatic rifle. They're going to put him in jail for 10 years. Oh, yeah. Is he a criminal?
They're a bunch of right-wing rednecks, and as far as I'm concerned, I'm not the least bit concerned about their meetings or anything they've got to say.
With gun control a hot issue, Labor Premier Barry Unsworth went to the polls and lost. One of the first acts of the incoming Greiner government was to lift the semi-automatic ban. The gun lobby claimed credit for Unsworth's defeat, and politicians across the country began treating shooters with a heightened respect.
Thank you, advisor 655, downloaded one more patient as soon as RPH Concord.
But after the 1991 Strathfield massacre by a man wielding an SKS semi-automatic, New South Wales ignored the gun lobby's perceived political clout and again tightened the laws. But there has never been a national consensus. Weapons banned in one state were easily bought across the border. Then came Port Arthur.
All Tasmanians and all Australians will be sick at heart tonight at this dreadful massacre. We express on behalf of all Tasmanians the sympathy to the bereaved families.
Shock soon gave way to outrage as thousands of people spilled onto the streets. Only this time, they were supporters of gun control.
Politicians are basically gutless. They put more value on a handful of votes from a minority of militant gun owners than they do on the safety, the lives and well-being of the rest of the community.
The message has been received loud and clear in Canberra. The federal government is now calling on the states to back a tough national gun reform package.
We have an opportunity in tragic circumstances to reverse a culture, to change an attitude, to not go down the path that the United States has gone down.
The Howard Plan includes a ban on all automatic and semi-automatic weapons, a national licence register for shooters and guns, a genuine reason for possessing approved firearms. Sports shooters, farmers and security guards are acceptable. Guns for personal protection are not. Detailed grounds for licence refusal, including violence convictions, mental and physical disabilities. Compulsory safety training, a separate purchase permit for each weapon, a compulsory record of purchases, and tighter control of mail-order gun sales.
It's going to affect a lot of people. I'm particularly conscious that some people in the rural community will find it inconvenient, and that's a group of people who always, in my experience, consider the national interest. I'm sorry about that, deeply sorry.
An apology rejected by farmers, who argue that smaller, low-powered semi-automatics are necessary.
They are very handy for shooting vermin, which is, in our case, foxes, wild dogs, rabbits. They can be used for putting down an animal occasionally that needs to be destroyed for whatever reason.
Responses from the highly factionalised gun lobby have varied. The radical fringe has compared John Howard to Hitler and advocates an American-style philosophy of gun ownership.
The right to keep and bear arms is a fundamental freedom enjoyed by free people. Once that right is restricted, it is lost. There is no room to compromise on military-style semi-automatic rifles. They are an essential part of our nation's defence system and as such are protected in law.
Notably absent from the debate, the Shooters Party, led by New South Wales State MP John Tingle. Mr Tingle has taken ill and other party figures are refusing to comment. Not so shy, the Sporting Shooters Association, claiming that more than 2 million unregistered gun owners will not comply with the proposed changes. The government is offering to pay for weapons, but the sporting shooters say the cost of surrendering an estimated 1.5 million semi-automatic rifles will be astronomical.
How are they going to do it? How is the police going to do it? First of all, to get back the 7,000 odd self-loading centrefires. Secondly, to pay people for them. Thirdly, to value those firearms so that people will actually turn them in. I mean, a $2,000 firearm, somebody says they're going to give you $100 for it, you're unlikely to get it. The practical implications are horrendous for the state, not the federal government. It is the state that's going to have to wear these practical problems.
The New South Wales Police Association, a long-term supporter of tougher gun laws, says there's one surefire way of making shooters comply.
I think there needs to be more powers for police to enter and search premises where there's reasonable cause to believe there are weapons that are prohibited or being misused. That's one that certainly would help police officers to find these weapons that are not being handed in.
When state ministers meet in Canberra tomorrow, they'll be keen to support the bulk of the Howard gun plan, while placating sports shooters who say they shouldn't be penalised. But in one suburban Sydney gun store tonight, there are still glimpses of something deeply disturbing, images that will only anger responsible shooters and strengthen the resolve of those calling for change.
That report from Mark Corcoran. We'll be talking tonight with some of the key protagonists in the gun control debate, but first, to give us a sense of how the states are lining up ahead of tomorrow's critical meeting in Canberra, I've been joined by Shane Stone, who is Chief Minister for the Northern Territory and Minister for Police. As well, Paul Whelan, who is Minister for Police in New South Wales, and both ministers are joining us tonight from Canberra. Gentlemen, thank you. Paul Whelan, just to start with, can you give me an idea of how many weapons there are in New South Wales? Do you know?
Well, no one really knows, and the estimate is as wide as 3 million, but that's really an estimate only.
And your last amnesty produced something like, what, 5,500, say 6,000 weapons?
No, it actually went up to 9,500, and it worked quite successfully. That's 9,500 guns that have been removed from New South Wales.
But it's a drop in the bucket, isn't it?
Well, it is in the totality, but it also produced additional licences for people
who are out there unlicensed in the community. But it's a step in the right direction, Maxine.
I ask because I think the one area of agreement tomorrow, I think, is this whole question of a national register. How confident are you, though, Paul Whelan, that shooters will come forward with their weapons? I mean, at this stage, we've got shooting groups around the country saying they will defy this ban.
Well, I'm reasonably confident about the Howard plan, and I'm very pleased that the Prime Minister again has reaffirmed his views, very strong views about the gun proposal that the Commonwealth are putting up. I support it. This is maybe the one-off opportunity that we have for national laws, for a national uniform approach to the very vexed issue of gun control.
But do you see a national register being effective?
I have no difficulty. That's part of the Prime Minister's plan, and clearly we are supporting it. We're supporting the Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister and the Federal Cabinet's approach to the issue.
OK. Shane Stone, will many weapon owners, do you think, resist whatever ban is arrived at tomorrow?
It would depend, Maxine, on the extent of the ban and the categories of firearms that fall into the different areas. But I would have thought that tomorrow represents a great opportunity for Australia to at least get uniform registration and licensing, training, also agreed issues on mail order. And we've come a long way from the last Police Ministers' Conference, which ironically was held in Tasmania, and John Howard has certainly given good national leadership on this important matter.
You've had an amnesty in place just this week, haven't you? A new one?
We have.
What's that produced?
Well, we've had approximately 13 weapons in the last 24 hours. We've run amnesties on a regular basis in the Territory, 4 in the last 6 years, and generally with some success.
How many weapons overall in the Northern Territory?
40,647, Maxine.
That's registered weapons?
Registered, and that's against 18,500 odd licensed shooters, and we have a very comprehensive licensing and registration system that lists not only the shooter themselves but also the firearms.
It's just, I mean, that's about 1 in 3 guns, is it, for every Territorian? Is that about right?
Well, there's a couple of ways of looking at that. The first is that at least we know how many firearms that we've got.
Sure,
We're pretty close to it.
It's a staggering number of guns, isn't it?
Well, it's not really. If there's 10 million firearms in Australia and we represent 1% of the population, then we're only at 0.4%. And also, you're dealing with people who live in remote areas, in pastoral properties, Aboriginal communities, and the figures are not extraordinary when compared with the number of firearms that we suspect are to be found throughout Australia.
Oh, well, what do you think that might tally, by the way?
Well, that's ranged from some estimates of 3.5 to 4 million to 10 million firearms. So one of the great difficulties rests in the fact that basically people don't know outside of the states that have a comprehensive registration system.
All right. Well, look, that being the case, I mean, I just find those figures staggering. OK, you are less than 12 hours away now from meeting with your other state colleagues. Is John Howard going to get the ban that he wants on semi-automatic and automatic weapons? Shane Stone?
Look, I believe that most of the proposals, and I don't speak for the other states, but just from my discussions with colleagues, that most of the proposals will be supported and supported enthusiastically, and you shouldn't for one moment believe that the Commonwealth proposals represent the high watermark. I mean, there are some areas that could be improved upon, but when you come to the categories of the firearms, then there is a case for exemptions for people who live in remote areas, people whose occupation takes them into a dangerous environment and may need the semi-automatic rimfire 22.
Why?
Well, if I could give you some examples, we have pilots who fly back and forth across the top part of Australia. They have traditionally had those sort of weapons in their planes in the event that they came down into areas that were infested with crocodiles, buffaloes or pigs. Also commercial fishermen. You'll find a very strong voice in rural women living in isolated pastoral areas. So, I mean, one shouldn't assume for one moment that this country is the same in terms of the environment in which we live. It's very different.
OK, am I right then in saying that the Northern Territory will support something less than a comprehensive ban tomorrow?
Well, if you go down the pathway of banning the semi-automatic 22 rimfire, then you should have exemptions and expand the category of reasonable cause or excuse to be able to have those weapons. There's also the anomaly of the shotguns. I noticed that the pump-action shotgun is in Category B, but the self-loading shotgun is in Category C, and I think that's inconsistent. They're either both going to be in Category C or both in Category B.
OK. Have you pointed all of this out, your position, to Darryl Williams tonight?
Yes, I've had an opportunity to take him through, because I think it's really important that there be a consensus in the Australian public that would deal with the issue that you first raised with me, where people willingly accede to the new legislative regime around Australia rather than go underground and decide to defy the law. And it's important that we take the Australian public with us.
And yet, as you know, I mean, John Howard has been absolutely explicit about this, that the weapons, the 22s that we're talking about, should be banned. I mean, he even went so far as to apologise in advance to the inconvenience this would cause. But he said in the national interest, it must be so. He couldn't have been clearer, could he? Well,
he couldn't have been, but it's hard to understand a ban on basically a pea shooter with a limited magazine capacity for a farmer who, if he wants to get rid of vermin on his property, has to bring in a professional shooter who will use the very same firearm, but the farmer himself can't do the job for himself, and that's the inconsistency. Now, I would hope that we will all have an opportunity tomorrow to work through all these proposals in a reasonable, sensible way, with an eye on the practical effect of what we're going to go back to our states and legislate for. OK. Paul Whelan, is this sounding like something less than consensus?
Well, it is, regrettably, but I understand the Minister's view. But New South Wales, we're totally supportive of the Howard proposal. That's a proposal developed by their cabinet representing the Liberal Party and the National Party. And I just find it odd, as the only Labor Minister, that I am agreeing to the Federal Liberal Prime Minister and National Party Deputy Prime Minister on the issue. I would support them. There are obviously some fine-tuning to be done, but I don't think the fine-tuning will extend to the matters that the Northern Territory Minister has extended.
Let me ask you, that what states support your position, Paul Whelan?
Well, I understand,
and that is a total ban.
I understand that's the federal government, the Howard proposal, and it's also supported by Tasmania. But and also I think today Kennett has also agreed that he would support the Howard proposal. But that remains to be seen. Yeah,
Shane Stone, what states would you say agree with your position?
Well, Maxine, I'm not here to speak for other states. They can quite capably speak for themselves.
But you've been consulting with other state ministers this evening?
I have, and people have been keen to try and fit in with the spirit of the proposals, and John Howard will have a big win tomorrow. There's no doubt in my mind about that. But people are concerned about those Australians who live in remote areas, live in outback areas and in the pastoral industry. And what they're seeking to do is accommodate their particular circumstances. You can still go with the general ban, but just broaden the exceptions so that these people can still access those firearms. I mean, one would agree that there would be little reason for someone living in suburbia to have such weapons, but this is a big country and there are people who do have special needs.
Is a big win, though, going to be anything less than what John Howard has set out in the document that's gone out to the police ministers?
Well, let me tell you this. I've been going to police ministers' meetings for a very long time and have often walked away frustrated. The Northern Territory has one of the toughest firearm legislation in Australia, next to South Australia and Western Australia. And for the first time, I see a bit of light at the end of the tunnel, and John Howard's to be congratulated for the leadership that he's shown on this issue.
Well, Paul Whelan, how would you interpret anything less than the adoption of the full Howard proposal?
Well, the position is that I'd support the Howard proposal, but I acknowledge what the Minister has said about the difficulties for outback Australia. But that's a matter for ministers to work through tomorrow, to look at the minute detail of the proposal. But
sorry, are you saying if the consensus from the other states is for some concessions, you will go along with that?
No, not at all. Not at all. No, but I said I understand it. I didn't say I was going to go along with it. I was supporting totally what the Prime Minister had said.
All right. Just a question of licensing for non-prohibitive weapons. I mean, the Commonwealth proposal sets out very detailed recommendations about licensing. Paul Whelan, are you satisfied with what you've seen?
Yes, I am. And some of the provisions we already have in New South Wales, but some we haven't, and some of them are from other states, and we'll adopt those. In other words, New South Wales laws will be strengthened. I'm happy to support that.
All right. And Shane Stone, licensing?
Already have a regime that's in fact stricter than what the Commonwealth's proposing, Maxine. For example, our licences are 3 years, 12 months for a C category weapon, and in the case of people who come into the Territory with a C category, they have 48 hours to notify registration. Under the Commonwealth's proposals, it is 3 months, and we find that unacceptable.
So you'd like to see what?
Well, as I said before, the Commonwealth proposals aren't necessarily the high watermark, and there are a number of areas that we'll be suggesting could be tightened.
All right. But I think, Maxine, that's the point that the Prime Minister has already made. His approach from the federal government is the minimum approach that's required for state police ministers to think about.
All right, gentlemen, on that note, thank you very much. Good luck tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Well, now to our next guests who've been waiting and listening to that part of the discussion. Ted Drain is the National President of the Sporting Shooters Association, an organisation of 45,000 gun owners and the country's largest firearm owners group. He joins us tonight from Adelaide. Simon Chapman is convener of the Coalition for Gun Control. He's Associate Professor of Public Health and Community Medicine at the University of Sydney and Westmead Hospital. He joins us tonight from Sydney. And Danny Walsh is the Secretary of the Victorian Police Association. Since joining the force in 1973, he's worked in the drug, armed robbery and homicide areas and has lectured at the Detective Training School, and he joins us tonight from Melbourne. Gentlemen, thank you all for waiting there. Simon Chapman, are you losing a bit of confidence by about the likelihood of a comprehensive ban on prohibited weapons, given what you've just heard?
I think the first thing to say, Maxine, is that if John Howard's minimal plan gets up tomorrow, this will be an historic moment in public health and safety for this country. And I think all Australians will be very, very grateful to Mr Howard and to all the police ministers who are gathered around that table.
But it doesn't sound as if that minimum approach might get consensus.
Well, what concerns me is the talk of somehow exempting the .22 rifles. I was concerned to hear Mr Stone refer to them as pea shooters. They don't shoot peas, they shoot bullets. And there have been 27 people killed in mass incidents involving .22 rifles. For example, Bain in New Zealand shot 5 people recently. Fred Dowd shot 5 people in Campsie in the early 80s in New South Wales. .22 rifles are the most common weapon used to kill people in this country, and I think that we need to be reminded of that when we're starting to address it. Having said that, though, I would accept what Mr Stone has said, that there are people who are living in remote areas, that some of the examples that he gave, where I think we would need to take those into account. And I think that John Howard's plan does show some room to move in there. But if you put all those people together, outback pilots, isolated rural people, people wishing to kill feral animals on their property, it's not going to come to an awful lot of people. And I'm very pleased to hear Mr Stone say that there's no place for such weapons in urban communities, because that's where the vast majority of Australians live, and that's where the vast majority of these incidents occur.
Danny Walsh, would you be disappointed if those 22s didn't wind up on the prohibitive list tomorrow?
Our view is quite clear that, look, you take them off the list, out of circulation completely. Let's make it an all-up approach. They're gone, they're finished, we don't have to talk about them anymore. Let's come back and then talk about a few more restrictions in the metropolitan areas.
Ted Drain, what about those 22s?
I can't believe that any government that's trying to get some sort of consensus would even suggest that 22 rimfire rifles, the pea rifle, not the pea shooter, as Simon Chapman said, but the pea rifle, would be included in this, and self-loading shotguns. There must be 1 million of those firearms in Australia, 1.5 million. And the problem of getting them out, of even considering that you would be able to take them out of the community after 90 years, have been in existence since 1904. And Danny knows, and Simon Chapman knows, just how many would be out there. Although Simon would talk the number down, I'm sure Danny wouldn't.
And you wouldn't talk it up, would you, Ted?
It's just, well, will you let me talk, Simon? I mean, you've got plenty to say, but, you know, give me an opportunity too, thank you, if you don't mind.
I would have thought, Mr Drain, isn't the point not the numbers out there? This is the most popular semi-automatic around. It does a lot of damage.
Yes,
Why should it not be on the prohibitive list?
Who does it do a lot of damage to?
To individuals when it's fired at them. And it has been used. Simon Chapman's point was that this has been used. This is a weapon that has been used in a number of mass killings.
Simon Chapman's point is based on somebody's research called Alpers, a radio announcer from New Zealand. And it's no official research in Australia at all. But the point is that the whole idea of getting them out of the community is so difficult that it just really takes a lot more consideration than just Mr Howard getting up in Parliament saying, this is what we're going to do.
Isn't it worth a try? Isn't it worth a try?
He doesn't have to do it. He's giving it to the states to do, and he's in a no-lose situation. If the states can't do it, he said, well, it was the states' fault they couldn't do it. If they do it, he'll say, well, that was our way of getting rid of these firearms. If the states make a mess of it, he'll blame the states again. He can't lose.
Okay.
And he doesn't have to spend anything to do it.
Danny Walsh, let me ask you, is this a task that's too difficult, or can you get your hands on these weapons?
We've never ever gone down the track at all by saying, look, this is too difficult to do, therefore we don't do it, no matter how meritorious it is. We've heard in the last 2 days that you don't take these out of existence on the basis that people like them. Well, that's not a very good excuse. It's too difficult. Well, if you don't even start in the first place, it will always be too difficult. Ted knows that 99% of his membership are law-abiding citizens, and if the law says you've got to hand it in, it's gone, that's it, it's gone. And if they determine that they won't hand it in, that's not what they want to do, well, let them understand the consequences. If the Parliament says illegal, hand them in, and you don't, you pay the consequences.
Mr. Drain, would you hand your weapons in?
Yes, I would. That's right.
Would
Right,
your members hand them in, or would they?
I think they would. No, well, the ones that are our members have already registered their firearms where registration's in place. When we know that there's 1 million unregistered firearms in Victoria, there's 300,000 odd licence holders in Victoria, but we know we think there's 1 million unregistered firearms. So there's a lot of people out there that haven't. And the point we make is that doing something like this, unless you give the police more powers, and the police want more powers, and that would be, as the man in New South Wales said, to search people's homes. On what pretext, I don't know. Maybe they wouldn't want a search warrant. Maybe they just want to go in and search. But
Ted,
unless you gave police
hold
those
on a
sort
minute,
of powers...
Ted, just hold on a minute. We don't need more powers. We can go and obtain a firearms warrant that allows us to force entry into a home and search it. If we reasonably believe that there's a firearm being held in there against the law. Now, you know that, Ted.
But how would you reasonably know when you don't know where they are now, Danny?
It's amazing.
When there's 1 million unregistered firearms. How would you know?
It's amazing, Ted, how many people will ring up and they'll put people in who've got those firearms in their homes, and we'll take the warrants out and we'll go and get them.
Danny, they haven't done it up to date. In Victoria, it hasn't been done up to date.
Sorry,
and you know that it's almost impossible to do it.
Simon Chapman, would you say a Dobbin system will work?
I was going to say that, Maxine. I think it's absolutely essential that we don't just content ourselves with passing these reforms tomorrow, but that we see an ongoing program, a high-profile program, whereby people can ring up a confidential number, give information to people, give information to the police about people that they've heard bragging about these guns, about people that they may have lived with in a relationship where the person had a gun, threatened with them and hasn't reported it, hasn't registered it. I think without that, we're going to have a lot of people who are not going to come to this party. I'd also like to say, Maxine, that when Mr. Drain gets up here and talks about we this, we that, he's actually talking about a very small minority of shooters. His organisation represents, I understand, only about 40 or 50,000 people in the country, whereas by his own account there are a lot more than that, and survey after survey have indicated that the great majority of shooters, 70% plus, believe that registration and some of the proposals that John Howard's put forward tomorrow are sensible and that they will comply with them.
Well, I don't believe it in New South Wales, Simon, because we only have a small number of people have actually taken out shooters' licences. But what a wonderful country you want to live in, Simon. What a wonderful country it would be when you're advocating that Australians put in other Australians because they've broken up in a relationship, or because they've had an argument with somebody, or because they're not happy with somebody. Put them in. Ring up the police and tell them.
If it's in the national interest, and it may you know, stop an accident, or it may force somebody to abide by the law.
It's within the national interest that cars are made to do the speed limit instead of being made to do 200k. Who would do that? It's within the national interest that people should not get behind the wheel of a car with 1 drop of alcohol in their blood. Now, I don't drink, so it wouldn't bother me at all, but certainly it bothers those people that do have a glass of wine for dinner. It would bother them. Now, that's in the national interest too. Why don't we do that?
Mr. Drain, I was breathalyzed on the way over here. It was a small inconvenience, but it's one that I think many of us feel happy to pay.
Why don't you advocate that, Simon? See how far you get with that one.
Gentlemen, we're getting off the point a bit.
Can we come back just a moment?
Yes, I was just... Danny Walsh?
Certainly. Look, Ted, I've never heard you in the past denigrate people for being responsible. It happens now that if people are in a relationship, that there is a reason for them to draw to the attention of the police or the courts that their partner, ex-partner, neighbour, friend has a firearm and they are concerned about it, they do it now. We don't denigrate them, we applaud them for it.
No, look, get it right, Danny. I'm not denigrating people. Anyone that threatens anyone with a firearm deserves all they get. From you, the police, the government, the courts, they deserve all they get.
But Ted,
what Simon Chapman is saying, and he said it the other night on television or radio, where somebody should dob in somebody they think has a gun or where they believe they have a gun. Now, you know as well as I do that a lot of these complaints now, these violence apprehension orders, have been malicious, that there's been complaints made with no basis at all.
But
and
the
I
whole
would think
point
the same
is,
thing would happen.
The whole point is, Ted, let's be serious about this. Let's be really serious. 1 ounce of prevention's worth a pound of cure. We've been trying to find a pound of cure for quite some time now, and a lot of lives have been lost.
Yep.
And the community is sick to death of seeing the loss of human life.
OK, can I just take this one point further, Dan Walsh? What about storage of weapons? For instance, the Commonwealth paper talks about the desirability of central storage. Now, that is getting guns out of private homes and into, say, some sort of central armoury. Now, they do not come down on the side of any prescriptive notion. What's your view of this?
Well, we believe there's a network already there that all it will take is for governments to tap into. We already trust certain categories of people to have firearms, that is, to store them in their hundreds, to sell them, to appraise people of their proper and safe use, and they're licensed gun dealers. Now, if governments were in a position where all they would have to do is expand through to the licensed gun dealer and make it commercially viable for that gun dealer to have safe storage of firearms, especially in the metropolitan area, then if you want to get your firearm, you go down to the licensed gun dealer. That's somebody that the community has already said that they trust. You sign your firearm out. You can go and do your sporting shooting. You bring it back and you sign it back in. You take away the domestic violence aspect of having firearms.
Mr. Drayden, what would be wrong with that?
Well, the research that I've read on domestic violence is that it doesn't happen instantaneously. It's over a long period that people are abused, and eventually it ends in some violence. But I would ask Danny, would you include that pistols and shotguns and every firearm, Danny? And
every firearm, Ted. Every firearm in the metropolitan area, but in the hands of licensed gun dealers, not the police. These are your own people. We've trusted them. We've given them licences. We've said that you can deal in firearms. You know full well that they handle them carefully. It is their profession. They know what it's about, and there are plenty of them around. So it's safe storage.
What would prevent me, Danny, from taking a gun out and doing what I needed to do when I had it out? I mean, you know, this fellow in Tasmania travelled nearly an hour to get where he was going before he committed these atrocities. Now, what would prevent anybody doing that?
If I can come in there, Maxine, I think that that's a most sensible suggestion that Danny is making, because the great majority of these incidents are impulsive incidents, committed often while somebody is drunk, in a fit of pique and so forth, and I'm speaking particularly about gun suicides here, which are 85% of gun deaths in this country. So I think that sort of proposal down the track is something that we really do need to look at in this country.
All right, and on that note, gentlemen, I will have to say thank you. Well, we're going to lose the bearer any minute, but thank you all very much for your time tonight.
Thank you, Maxine.
Thank you.